Hello and welcome back to Storytime with Eric Zimmer. Last time we read the first book of the George and Martha series, simply titled George and Martha. Now we're up to book number 2. And this time, as you will notice in the illustrations, there has been that the designs of the characters have changed a little bit. They now look a little wider. This is what they looked like before in the first book. Now here's what they look like in the second book. They're a little wider now, like hippos really look, but their teeth are still a little small. Their teeth grow larger in the later books. So anyways, enough talking. Let's get into it. From 1973, Book 2 of the George and Martha series, George and Martha Encore. You ready? Alright, let's begin. More stories about two great chums. Story number 1, The Dance Recital. George and Martha were having a disagreement. "I think dancing is dumb," said George. "Dancing is not dumb," exclaimed Martha. "Dancing is fun, and if you don't come to my dance recital, I'll be very angry." And we don't want that to happen. So, of course, George went to Martha's recital. "I'm going to hate this," he said to himself. Looks like there's popcorn on his tie, too. But what a surprise for George! Martha's dance of the happy butterfly was so impressive. "Dancing looks like fun," said George. "Well, you never know unless you try it." The next day, George went to dancing class. "You see," said Martha, "dancing is fun." And there's a little plaque saying dancing is fun right up there. Very soon, George was in his own dance recital. Martha said that his Mexican hat dance was the best she had ever seen. The second story, The French Lesson. George went to Martha's house for his French lesson. "Bonjour, Martha," said George. "Bonjour, George," said Martha. George sat next to Martha on the sofa. "How do you say 'give me a kiss' in French?" asked George. "You say," and here's the pronunciation beneath, "Voulez-vous m'embrasser?" answered Martha. It says "ooh la la" in the book, even though that's not what the French actually say. I don't even know who came up with that phrase. And notice in the picture it says fleur, the French word for flower. Interesting. And that is just what George did. "Tee-hee," said Martha. "I knew you were going to do that." So did I. Story number 3, The Disguise. George decided to dress up as an Indian. "This disguise will really fool Martha," he chuckled. "She'll never recognize me. I can still tell it's him, especially with that golden tooth." But George wasn't fooled a bit. "Called it." "Hi, George," she said. "Why are you wearing that Indian costume?" George was so disappointed. He walked away hanging his head. Martha felt simply awful. She hadn't meant to hurt George's feelings. "George," said Martha, "I would never have recognized you if you hadn't been for your bright smiling eyes. It's so hard to disguise your smiling eyes." And of course, George felt much, much better. Story number 4, The Beach. One day, George and Martha went to the beach. "I love the beach," exclaimed Martha. "So do I," said George. "However, we must be sure to put on our suntan lotion." Martha refused to put on her suntan lotion. "You'll be sorry," George called out. "Oh, pooh," said his friend Martha. "You're a fuss-budget, George." That's what they said about Lucy Van Pelt in Peanuts. Martha was having such a lovely time. Aha! The next day, Martha had a terrible sunburn. She felt all hot and itchy. But George never said, "I told you so," because that's not what friends are for. And notice the phrase in the picture frame says, "We love our friends." And the last story, the garden. Martha was so discouraged. Her garden was an ugly mess of weeds. "I just don't seem to have a great thumb," she sobbed. Well, she's not Stanley the Troll from A Troll in Central Park. Ugh. What a horrible movie. George hated to see Martha unhappy. He wanted so much to help. Good man. Suddenly, George had a splendid idea. He went to the florist and bought all the tulips in the shop. Tulips were Martha's favorite flowers. Very quietly, George crept into Martha's garden and stuck the tulips in the ground. But just then, Martha happened to look out the window. "Oh dear," said George, "you're always catching me." But Martha was so pleased. "Dear George," she said, "I would much rather have a friend like you than all the gardens in the world." How beautiful. Alright, and that's the end of Book 2. I'll see you next time for Book 3, to be continued.